All right, welcome to another video movie review stream. My name is Mark McPherson, film critic for movieswithmark.com, filminquiry.com, and twincitiesgeek.com. So it's been a while, but we're towards the end of October here, and there's a lot of films to cover. There's a few that I gotta catch up from the rest of October. Of course, we're going to be reviewing Joker Filet Adieu, the second Joker film from Todd Phillips. We'll also be talking about The Apprentice, the Donald Trump film, which came out the middle of October. And I'll also be talking about a new film coming out this week called Conclave, a papacy, what do you call it? Like, kind of like a religious political thriller, I guess would be the right word for it. Starring Ray Fiennes. That's coming out this Friday, so I'll be talking about that as well. And there are a few other films that I want to get around to talking about, including VHS Beyond, the latest found footage horror anthology, Woman of the Hour, the latest serial killer thriller from director Anna Kendrick, and We Live in Time, a new romantic drama starring Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh. So, a lot to cover today. In fact, I wanted to get to some of the stuff early, but it kept getting stuck in my backlog here. In fact, there's two other films that I wanted to talk about, too, that I got early screeners for, which I know I'm not going to have time to talk about today because I don't like to let these streams go on for too long. So I have more to cover next time. But yeah, we're getting right into like award season right now, so this is when I'm really starting to get a lot more screeners that are starting to pile up here. They're just starting to mount, like it's slowly coming in right now, and then like when we get into like November and December, it's just going to be like a mountain that's going to come down. In particular, I'm glad that I caught up on most of these, because like Conclave I saw about like 2 weeks ago, and it's just coming out this week, so I'm going to be covering that here. So if you would like early reviews of that, like Conclave, so you can figure out what's playing this weekend, or you're curious about what's going to be the best film of the year, stay tuned to this channel. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to keep up to date on the latest movie reviews. Not just, I know it's like, you say that for the engagement, but I really do mean it. Like, I do offer this, early reviews. So that's what I'm selling. Okay, so without further ado, let's get to Filet Adieu. And yes, that's how it's pronounced. All right, let me get my notes up here. Get a good drink of water here. And we'll cover the big ones here. Okay. So here we go in 3, 2, 1. So Joker, Filet Adieu, is the sequel to Todd Phillips' 2019 Joker film, which honestly really didn't work for me. I know a lot of people loved it because they liked the kind of like the griminess of having a more grounded Joker that tries to like explore like mental health and class divide, which the first film did kind of do that. Like, it kind of stumbled around here and there, but you could mostly read those surface level messages. My biggest problem was just that there was so much in the film that contradicted itself, and just didn't really build. It just felt like a pastiche of a bunch of like great scenes for like Joaquin Phoenix to like kind of like step into and just control. But in terms of like a narrative focus, I felt that Todd Phillips is just all over the place. But at least with like the first film, I could kind of like tilt my head and kind of squint and try to see what everyone kind of loved about it. Like, I mean, like I like like it's a film that literally says eat the rich, so I guess like the class divide stuff is easier to read for like people who are familiar with comic book films but want something more subversive and more grounded. And wanted that out of like a DC Comics film, which is why that film became, I imagine why that film became like such a big success. That and Phoenix's performance and all that. But with Filet Adieu, I would have to like twist myself into a pretzel in order to see like the greater impact here. Like, I can see where Phillips was kind of heading towards with this film, but at the same time, it's a much messier film. It's a much more contradictory film, and it's just a film that's not comfortable with itself and isn't sure what it wants to do with this material. Because like my biggest problem with how Todd Phillips approaches this material with the Joker is that I mean, Todd Phillips has been pretty open, saying like he really doesn't like comic book movies. In fact, like before he made the first Joker film, like immediately before the first Joker film, he made a film called War Dogs, which was a kind of like a lukewarm true story arms dealing type of film that kind of waffled between comedy and drama here and there, and it wasn't a big success. It was, critics were very lukewarm on it, and Phillips just kind of frustrated, saying how he doesn't like the current movie landscape with like comic book movies and all that. So I kind of understand his frustration, where he's kind of like, oh, okay, fine, you want comic book movies, I'll do a comic book movie, but it's going to be on my own terms, and I'm going to contort it and revise it to make it the type of film that I want to make it. And on that level, I know like a lot of people who are like big devotees of like, the DC Comics lore and all that would probably hate the film on those merits alone, which I don't. I'm completely fine if someone wants to take the DC Comics material and use it as kind of like a lattice for trying to make a better film. The problem was Phillips really didn't make a better film. He kind of made kind of like a wannabe Scorsese street thriller that just didn't have a firm thematic focus, and it was scattershot, and it was all over the place, and it relied on a lot of its atmosphere to entrance people into like the story of this type of Joker, of Arthur Fleck, played by Joaquin Phoenix. So Filet Adieu, I think, is more thematically lost, and I think it's just because like it's a film that isn't quite sure what it wants to be. Like, I've heard that Phillips said that he kind of did want to do a musical, but was also kind of hesitant. Because, like, he's been very open, like, oh, well, it's not really a musical. It is. If you've watched this film, it's, like, straight up a jukebox musical, which would be fine, but the thing is, like, the musical sequences in this film, because they're pretty much all imaginary. They're all from the point of view of Arthur, who, after the events of the first Joker film, just retreats into his own imagination of what would be like a better life, to be more of like a showman, and there isn't much of a build there. And I think most of that is because like the musical sequences don't really find they don't really find like a firm path for what they're trying to do here. Like they fluctuate between like, classic Hollywood show tunes and like 60s folk rock, and I think they do a little bit of gospel at one point, and it's just it doesn't really build up to anything. And more importantly, I think they don't really feel like fantasies that much, because you do see like the reality bleed in there of Arthur being betrayed and Arthur just not being a good singer. Because when you're seeing these fantasy sequences, yes, he is appearing, as like the Joker that he was in like the last film, but it's just the same Joker. It's not even like the fantasy version of that. And I think the film kind of prepares you for that by having this animated prologue, which it seems like it's trying to stage it like a classic Looney Tunes cartoon, and it doesn't really have that appeal, and it doesn't really say much of anything about Arthur or his fantasies or where he wants to go in all this, because the whole framing of Filet Adieu is that it's mostly about Arthur going on trial for his crimes, which is I will say this, it's an interesting idea. I like the idea of kind of this film interrogating itself and, basically interrogating the last film through Arthur by bringing in all these people who witnessed his atrocities. So you kind of got a little bit of, similar staging to how, like the last episode of Seinfeld brought everyone into question. This film kind of does that by bringing back a few like familiar characters from the last film and talking about Arthur and his crimes. But at the same time, like, it wanders here and there. Like, it's mostly just reiterating and reviewing. It doesn't really interrogate that much, because like you would think that, through Arthur's lens, like this would have to have some sort of like effect on him, but his mind keeps wandering. He keeps getting lost in his own delusions, and he becomes much more obsessed with Harleen Quinzel, whereas this film wants to call her Lee, played by Lady Gaga, who is mostly just in the film as a siren. She's, basically meant to like encapsulate the obsessed fan who loves the idea of Joker and how people have become obsessed with him, not just as like, someone who's fighting against like, you know, the elites of Gotham, but also just like, you know, like a symbol that people rally behind. And I do like the fact that the sequel does kind of try to frame the last film as being like this made-for-TV movie, which it would have been nice to get like see a little bit of few glimpses of that. Like, I understand, yes, it's meant to just, you know, be more of like a representational thing. It's not really that important that you see it. I would just, you know, I think that would actually be a good like little comedic detour here and there, just to say like, yeah, here's how ridiculous the last film looked if you idolized it and what you took away from it. And I say that only because like this is a very long film running well over 2 hours, and it just meanders around all over the place. Like the courtroom drama scenes keep going on, and like I said, they don't really interrogate much of anything. Not until like I think like the last few court scenes is there any bigger revelation within Arthur's life. That most of them just kind of feel like filibustering, like they're just taking up time. They're really not that interesting. You have the prison drama scenes, which I thought were kind of interesting, but again, like they feel like they're building to something, and they don't really have much of a payoff here. Especially with Brendan Gleeson playing one of the guards, Jackie Sullivan, which at first, you know, I the way that I looked at it is I thought this role was supposed to be like a play on the 60s Batman show, how they would have like, you know, the Irish cop. I thought they were kind of trying to play it up because like he does seem a little bit jovial and kind of friendly around Arthur, until Arthur starts embracing more of his Joker side, and then Jackie turns darker and more vicious, and that just kind of feels like the go-to for Todd Phillips here. It's just, you know, just slathering everything with this grime, to cover up the fact that like that the thematic build here about ultimately Arthur learning that, you know, like this Joker persona is not something he wants to embrace and has like a harmful effect, which doesn't really build throughout the film. It feels like a last minute thing that he realizes as the trial is coming to an end, just admit outright. It's like, I don't want to be Joker anymore. It's like, it's pretty much like that I Think You Should Leave Now sketch, where Tim Robinson puts on all this makeup to go in disguise in a mall, and it's just frustrated, doesn't know what to do, and he's just angry, and just eventually just gives up and says, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be Joker 2019 anymore. That's ultimately what this ends up being. It just feels like Todd Phillips doesn't really know what he wants to do with this material, and I think it's just because, honestly, I think just the way that it's framed, it looks like Todd Phillips is unsure of the type of film that he wanted to make. Because like I said, it's clearly a musical, but he doesn't want to admit it's a musical. He's said that he doesn't strictly want to do what the comic book lore does here. And yet he's still framed like Bruce Wayne within the last film. And within this film, he frames Harvey Dent. And not only does he put Harvey Dent in there, but he also like stages his origins that lead to him becoming Two-Face. And just like, why did you need there's no point to any of this. It's just like it's just comic book Easter eggs. It's like, it's so frustrating too, because it feels like Phillips is trying to do something different, but he's not that in tune with like comic books or comic book movies to understand that no, this isn't as subversive as you think it is. Because from what I've heard from interviews, Phillips seems to think that including Harley Quinn would be a little bit refreshing to have someone that Joker can play off of, despite the fact that the last time we saw a Joker, not counting his last minute appearance in the Batman, but in the Suicide Squad, he was with Harley Quinn. And in fact, we've gotten more Harley Quinn in the past DC Comics films than Joker in the past. So it's not an original or a refreshing idea to have Harley Quinn included in there. It feels very much like what you would expect from like a comic book movie, that tries to adhere to what fans might like, but also wants to divert as much as possible. Because I know in that minute, there's going to be a lot of people who would be fans of like the first Joker film who are going to hate this film, possibly because it's more disjointed and it doesn't have enough faith in itself. But I imagine for a lot of people, it's also going to be for how it feels like it's betrayed them, because it wants this Joker to be framed as a bad guy and not a revolutionary, which it's obvious. It's hammering the point home, which I would be fine with if it didn't arrive so inexplicably. Like, it's almost like an afterthought by the third act, where Phillips is kind of like, maybe I should make it more clear that, Joker's a bad guy, and you're not really supposed to encourage the crap that he does in this film, and that it's ultimately going to lead to a terrible spot, which most people who could read the thematic elements through the last film could see it. You have to peer through a lot of the muck that gets thrown at the screen with it, but it's there. Within this film, like I said, it's scattershot. It doesn't really build up Arthur much as, like, a character who's thinking about this stuff, and it just meanders around all these ideas and just kind of ends abruptly after 2.5 hours of dull courtroom scenes and inconsistent musical fantasy scenes and prison drama scenes that are mostly lukewarm. I think between all those sequences, I think probably the prison drama was my favorite, only because I felt there was more stakes and tensions and actual build-up between characters going on there. And it's not just because, like, Phillips doesn't want to make this version of it. It's pretty clear this isn't the version of the Joker you want to make. I mean, it's Bruce Wayne was a kid in here. This Joker's named Arthur Fleck, which is a name that, most people know Jack Napier and all that. So this is definitely not really the Joker. It's mostly Todd Phillips's ideas of the Joker, which, again, I think is fine. I think it's fine as an idea. You can use DC Comics as a lattice to tell different types of films. In fact, we saw it this year with the People's Joker, which I thought did a great job taking past iterations of the Joker and using them to form a more personal story with a very firm thematic core and heart to it that you can follow and that you can see what the inspiration is. For taking all this DC Comics material and trying to weave a better film out of it. This sequel is just lost. It meanders all over the place, and I think Phillips has said that, he wanted to make this seem like a film that was made by crazy people, which, yeah, kinda, but not in the probably not in the good way that I think that he wanted the film to seem like a very very cerebral and very introspective film about Joker as an icon, as an idea, and basically attacking, aspects of idealizing, this symbol, this violent symbol, and somewhat more of like a critique of toxic masculinity. That's the biggest problem. It's just, it doesn't build. It's inconsistent. So many of these scenes contradict other scenes, and a lot of the ideas here just don't boil up that well. Like Lady Gaga is mostly here as like a siren. She has some good singing, but I mean, it's Lady Gaga. You expect that from her, and she doesn't really have much dialogue or much interest beyond just being like an eager fan who is kind of like I said, she's a siren. She lures Arthur into embracing more of this Joker side, which, again, these are all good ideas. Like, the way that I'm saying this, like, yeah, these are good ideas. I would like to see these, build up in a Joker film. But they don't. They're just like, okay, here's the prison scene, here's the musical scene, here's the courtroom scene, and we're gonna fluctuate between them, and the film will just kind of, like, end eventually. On a note where it's like, I don't want to be the Joker anymore. So, yeah, I didn't like the previous Joker film, and I really don't like Filet Adieu, which gets even more lost in its themes and just doesn't have a good idea. And again, it's not just about breaking lore. I'm fine with them breaking lore if they want to if the people behind breaking the lore want to make a better film. And Todd Phillips didn't. He didn't with the first Joker film, and he really doesn't with this Joker sequel. So Joker Filet Adieu, I think, is still playing in theaters. Actually, it might not be. I was just thinking, like, yeah, it's been a box office bust. So kind of sad too, because like if there had actually been like a really good build to it, I probably would have liked the sequel more than the first film. So yeah, plan on seeing if you're waiting for Filet Adieu, it'll probably end up on Max in like the next month or so. So you won't have to wait long. All right. Next up. Well, going a little bit more in chronological order here, we'll cover The Apprentice. Okay. Here we go. I just gotta pronounce this name here quick. Because I always mispronounce her name. It's Maria Bakalova. Bakalova. I mispronounce her name every time. All right. So here we go. The review of the Apprentice in 3, 2, 1. So, The Apprentice is a film all about the relationship between Donald Trump and his lawyer Roy Cohn between the events of the late 1970s and the early 1980s. Now, I think that the idea of focusing on this relationship is kind of an interesting idea and trying to kind of like form a basis for how Trump kind of like amassed this idea of how to attain power and how to hang on to it, which is that, even though like Trump came from like a wealthy family, he made a lot of bad business decisions, but ultimately, it's if you can create the illusion that you have power and that you are more powerful, then that seems to be just as effective as actually being powerful, which Trump did embrace. But the thing is, like within The Apprentice, it's one of those like those biopic films which it just covers like the broad topic and just like narrows down to like a few bullet points and kind of simplifies them to a degree that kind of makes me uncomfortable with how much they try to like reduce so much of this meeting of the minds between Trump and Cohn to such a simplistic degree that someone is just going to write it off. It's just like, oh, okay, this was the guy who inspired Trump. This is where he got his, capitalist greed ideas, and that, this kind of formed the basis of this guy who just, decided to play by the game and learn from the best and betrayed the best. I think that's a much too simple. Like, here's the thing: if you're not familiar with this era of Trump, this is going to be an enlightening film, because you're going to be like, oh my god, like this is what Trump did, and he was being racist at this time, and like this is how he handled tenants, and this is what Roy Cohn did, and this is what Trump did to Cohn. Yeah, it's a bit shocking, and it seems like pretty damn good drama. But the thing is, if you've actually looked into like the history of this, it feels like they're going a bit soft on this. In fact, they go so soft that I think that because like Trump was trying to like block this film because he thought it was just going to be a smear campaign. Honestly, I think this film kind of goes out of its way at certain points to humanize Trump a little too much, where you're kind of like trying to feel him, feel for him more for like his daddy issues here. So in the film, Donald Trump, played by Sebastian Stan, he does a good performance, but again, it's one of those, much like a lot of other like biopic dramas, it's more of this actor, embracing like his own version of the performance rather than, feeling like Trump. It doesn't really sound like young Trump. In fact, I closed my eyes for a minute just to think like, who does this remind me of? And then this kind of sounds like Bill Burr in certain bursts. Like it kind of does sound like Bill Burr when I was listening to him. But he does like he does an okay job, I think, for portraying Trump in the way that this drama wants to kind of humanize him by showing him at his worst, showing him at his most vicious, and showing him at his most desperate and feeling like he's in over his head at several points. So Trump basically wants to prove himself to his father, Fred Trump, played by Martin Donovan, who, just looks down on his children, and Don just wants to find some way to kind of, rise up and make a name for himself in New York. And the person who can make that happen is Roy Cohn, played by Jeremy Strong, who Cohn has a history of, working with, people like Joseph McCarthy and Richard Nixon, which the film kind of addresses and has like Nixon in like the background at certain points, to let these are the scummy people that Cohn has worked with. But I would say that Jeremy Strong's performance as Cohn is really good. I think it's even better. Like, I know a lot of people have been, praising Sebastian Stan, but I think Strong's performance as Cohn is definitely a scene stealer. And I just think because that, Jeremy Strong recognized that, okay, Cohn's got to be confident. He's got to feel like he controls the room and that he can smear anybody he wants and can take control of anything he wants. and can just be outwardly homophobic, and then behind closed doors can actually be a homosexual, which eventually led to him dying of AIDS, which the film does cover. But like I said, in bullet points here, because this film jumps around all over the place, that there's rarely a moment where you get to slow down and kind of see how Trump and Cohn were building off of each other during this dynamic. And I think a big problem with that is that the film has a big time skip here. We spent a lot of time in the 1970s for maybe the first half of the film with Trump building up, his credibility. And then it immediately jumps further into the 80s when Trump has a little bit more power and he's getting ready to throw Cohn under the bus. And another byproduct of this is that you really don't get to see much of what happened with Ivana Trump, played by Maria Bakalova, and she mostly just becomes kind of the unfortunate victim of everything that Trump does. And there's a lot of warning signs there that she probably shouldn't have gotten involved with Trump because he stalked her to a photo shoot. He made her sign a prenup under Cohn's Cohn saying oh, you're gonna get married, she's gonna take you for everything, so sign this prenup and all that. And then eventually the film does cover the uncomfortable subject of Trump raping Ivana. That is in the film, but a lot of key events here, it just kind of it's there, it's present, it's horrifying, and it's briefly addressed, in between Trump's public appearances. Trump just kind of whispering smile, don't make me look bad, and then it just kind of moves on from there. And it moves on to such a disturbing degree that clearly he abuses her, but we just get the bullet points. We just got a very quick scene of him saying I paid for breast implants, but now you're ugly and I don't like you anymore and I don't find you sexually attractive, and then jump to his next big venture of opening up Trump Tower, and then jump to tossing Roy Cohn out and taking him for everything that he's worth and swindling him, and just all these key points which would be fascinating to explore. We're never really given those moments because we have to get immediately to the next scene and the next showcase of Sebastian Stan or Jeremy Strong, which, don't get me wrong, good performances, but it's in a film that doesn't really have time to explore more of the dynamic between Donald Trump and Roy Cohn. They don't have time to such a degree that it feels there's one early scene in the film where Trump attends a party for Cohn, in which in this alcohol and coke fueled party, he just stumbles into Cohn on a gay orgy, and it's okay, that's the quick bullet point. Yeah, Cohn is a closeted homosexual, we got it. But then the film also has a lot of these winking nods to how this is kind of like the origin story of how Trump led up to his presidency. So we get if you're familiar with this time period, you can see all the little Easter eggs that lead up to Trump's presidency. Obviously there's that time where he was interviewed and he says, maybe I'll run for president. Haha, wink, wink, he's going to do that. And then, we get the Ronald Reagan campaign in which, someone brings up Trump. Oh, he's got this slogan called, Make America Great Again. Doesn't sound good. And Trump's I don't know if that's that good. I don't like politicians. It's yeah, okay, yeah, we get it. It's moments like that really kind of take you out and make you feel this is almost kind of a sketch. They're trying to lean more into the comedy of it all, which is hard to accept when you consider the brief admission of the racism within the Trump family, and then just the sexism that he has, and then him sexually abusing his wife and all that. It just all this like I said, that reduction I think simplifies it to such a degree where it kind of becomes like I said, it becomes almost a joke in and of itself. In particular, there's one scene where Cohn is at his lowest, where he's dying of AIDS, and Trump tries to throw him a little party, and he gives him some jewelry, but then he realizes the jewelry's fake, and they wheel out this cake that's the American flag. And throughout the film, Cohn has been saying, oh, my greatest client is America. America's my client. And here he is with this cake as he's dying and being betrayed by Trump, and just cries over this cake to symbolize that, he's betrayed his biggest client. He's betrayed America. And it's almost kind of this grim, foreshadowing for what would happen to America. And it's just, it's so very on the nose and not in a very like clever not like in like a very clever way for how much it wants to focus on that era, but also give nodding winks to like the future of it. So it's one of those like it's a very frustrating biopic because there is some interesting stuff here to explore, and there are some good scenes between Stan and Strong that I think are are fairly good. That I'm glad I kind of watched the film. But ultimately, the more I thought about it, like what is this communicating about Trump? Because like it ends right at the point, you know, after Roy Cohn's death, where Trump is talking about, you know, like the art of the deal and what he plans to do for the future. And, you know, they have that close up of the American flag in his eye. And it's just, just very on the nose. But it's like, this is all stuff that, you know, for, like I said, if you're familiar with this era, this is all review. And if you're not familiar with it, this kind of just feels like getting like the cliff notes of that era when there is so much to explore. And I don't think the film gives enough time the way that it just, you know, skips ahead in time, and it has all these montages and these quick scenes and these and like a lot of, like I said, a lot of scenes that humanize Trump, where they show him humiliated and crying and being bitter about, you know, not being accepted by his father and just, you know, not feeling like he's a good person to such a degree that it's just, it kind of like waffles over what is this film trying to say, other than the fact that, you know, yeah, the basics of, you know, Trump hooked up with Cohn, and that's where he gained a little bit of his philosophy. And it's like, yeah, interesting, but we're not given enough time to like absorb it, or more importantly, to explore it. We're just given like the basics of this type of story. So ultimately, even though the film is communicating some key aspects of history, it doesn't feel like it's communicating enough and doesn't really have much more to say, which hasn't already been obvious from how Trump turned out and the history that we do know about him as a businessman and eventually as a politician. So ultimately, The Apprentice, I think, had some potential, but it just kind of ends up being an average biopic that I don't really think is going to say much for those who aren't already familiar with the history. So yeah, it's good performances, but not a very good film for this type of material. So The Apprentice should be playing in a few theaters here and there. Let me answer the questions in the chat here. So Beth Scott asked, was it a documentary type or an actor playing Trump? It was an actor playing Trump. It's a, I'd say like a, I'm trying to think of the right term. I usually say like biopic for based on a true story. But yeah, it's Sebastian Stan playing Donald Trump and Jeremy Strong playing Roy Cohn. And it's mostly just covering like the key events between them as key figures in the 70s and 80s. All right. What's next on the docket? Oh, let's get to the newest film this week. Let's talk about a better film. Yeah, so we already talked about a lukewarm film, The Apprentice, and a terrible film, Joker 2. Let's talk about a good one. Let's get some political thriller here. Yeah, I don't think there's, like I said, there's not much of a point to like the Apprentice. If you're already familiar with this material, you're not going to get much more out of it, other than I guess like seeing like a more humanized version of Trump, or a simplified version of him. So, because like I said, they do address the racism in his family, but it's downplayed. Like it only comes up in conversations a few times, even though it did play a big part in how Trump ran like apartments during the 70s and even more during the 80s. So yeah, bullet points. Like I'd say like, I guess like the best recommendation I could give for that film is that, you know, see it as like a jumping off point to get like interested in that material, and then actually like look up the actual history of like Trump and Cohn, because there's way more to it than that film reveals. It's broad brush. Because like I said, I don't like the fact that it simplifies so much of Trump's, because I know there are going to be people who walk away from that film and they're going to be like, oh, okay, it was capitalism and Roy Cohn. That's who made him evil. It's like, no, there's there's a lot more to it than that, you know. Okay. Anyway, let's get to a better film. All right, here we go with Conclave. In 3, 2, 1. So, Conclave is a religious political thriller. And that might sound like an odd combination, but actually it really works here. This is it's based on a book by Robert Harris. And it concerns a papacy conclave where they have to decide on a new pope after the current pope has died. So with the pope dead at the very beginning of the film, all the cardinals have to like assemble and sequester themselves, and they basically have to vote on who is going to be the new pope. Now, someone who's really not looking forward to heading up this conclave as much is Cardinal Lawrence, who is played by Ralph Fiennes, with a surprising amount of complex dignity, I think, to him. Because the thing is, like, Lawrence is just getting weary of the papacy. You know, he's thinking about not wanting to, you know, be a cardinal anymore. Like he's losing his faith he's losing his faith in both his religion and his position within the church. Like he's just feeling like, you know, it's just not working for me. And I'm thinking, like, you know, after this election is done, I'm out. Like I'm gonna dip. You know, I've had enough, and I'm getting older. I don't think I can keep doing this. Unfortunately, he realizes that, oh well, this election is not quite what it seems here, because like immediately once he arrives on the scene where they discover the dead pope, like some red flags have been setting off here. In particular, he has an interaction with Cardinal Tremblay, who's played by John Lithgow, who seems very shady. You can tell like he's hiding something that wasn't revealed like so soon to like the pope's death. That is very much like a secret. And Lawrence is kind of like, at first he's kind of like reluctant. He's just kind of like, okay, that seems a little weird, but you know what? I'm losing my faith, and I'm not really interested that much in the church anymore, so whatever. But then he soon comes to learn that there might be something more at play here. And then, of course, like, he realizes that, you know, like, this election is going to have, like, a much bigger effect than he thinks. Because, like, the other cardinals who are vying for this position, they all have... Some of them do really have like very extreme views. In particular, there's Cardinal Tedesco, played by Sergio Castellito, who basically has very racist views. Like you learn this through like their interactions over lunch, where Tedesco is basically talking with Lawrence, saying like, hey, you know, we can't have, you know, a black person as a pope. It's like, okay, I get it. You want to bring more racist views into the church. But then you have Cardinal Adimi, who they do think has a chance at becoming the pope. But the thing is, Adimi has very backwards sexist views about how to treat women. So it feels like there's some stuff on the line in this election, and that there might be some foul play, especially concerning Adimi's interaction with one of the sisters. Like it feels like there is like a mystery there. There's some manipulation going on, and Lawrence feels like, okay, I think I might have to investigate this. So this mystery starts going on about what really happened after the Pope's death, and it's not something so simple as, you know, like who killed the Pope. It's nothing like that, and it's not even so simple as, you know, who's trying to manipulate the election, because that is at play here. But there's a lot more internal conflict going on, and a lot of stuff that's been covered up. This becomes particularly interesting with how there's the arrival of a new cardinal who hadn't been known for the longest time, and who's been like serving in like the Middle East. And there isn't much known about this cardinal, and it feels like there might be a bigger secret here, and there is, but it's not revealed until much later in the film. So basically Lawrence is conflicted about, you know, trying to unearth what's going on in this election, while at the same time also being thrown into this election. Because when they vote, it's one of those deals where, like, you know, it has to have like a bigger majority for a pope to be chosen, and this leads to multiple voting, and Lawrence's name is thrown in at one point, to the point where he's like, you know, I don't want to be pope. Whoever's voting for me, don't vote for me. Vote for someone else. Like, in particular, he wants Cardinal Bellini, who's played by Stanley Tucci, to be elected pope, because Bellini does seem like a really good choice for the Pope. You know, he's got very progressive views, but Bellini is also, he's very hesitant as well, because he realizes, look, I'm a cardinal who's got very progressive views in front of like all these people who are like racist and sexist. I'm going to be seen as too extreme. They're not going to elect me. And moreover, I don't want to be elected because I think that's too much to put on me. But at the same time, I think Bellini is also a good a sidekick for Lawrence to have, because Bellini also recognizes the importance of this election, where you can't just sit on the sidelines. Even if you don't want to be nominated as Pope, you still have to do, your due diligence and try to do the right thing and pull back the curtain on this mystery a bit. And I think, and it actually works. I love the way that this film is set up, where it first off, it looks beautiful. The scenes within like the decadent religious structure for the conclave is just beautiful to look at. I love the cinematography and the way that it's shot. I love the way that all these different political themes are woven in throughout, where it never feels like just one thing is being communicated. Like, it's not just about keeping like the xenophobia out of the church, and it's not just about unearthing the corruption within the church, which you can sense is coming from that a good source of all this would be tapping Sister Agnes, who's played by Isabella Rossellini, who does have some secrets worth unearthing, but it's one of those things where like cardinals and the sisters put this distance between them, where it feels like Lawrence has to cross that line and be more open. Like it's up to him, this kind of like reluctant cardinal, to unearth this corruption. And I love the way that it proceeds. Like, it's got great dialogue here. Like the performances here are great. You have Ralph Fiennes, Stanley Tucci, John Lithgow, and they're all fantastic in this. Just the way that Lithgow tries and fails to hide his like seedy tactics within the election. The way that Tucci is kind of like somewhat hesitant, but also very like fiery at times with what he wants to force. And the way that Lawrence kind of like shows more interest and just like a gentle nature with how he wants to do what's best for the church, but also regain a little bit of his faith here. It's a great intersection between like faith and politics, and it's tested to a great degree here. And another aspect that I really liked of this film is the way that there's outside tension, because there's a focus here that it's just on the popes. It's just like, who's the better man to nominate here. And I think the stakes are raised a lot more when they start hearing more about terrorism that's going on within the city. Like, they hear that there's been a terrorist attack, many miles away, and then it starts hitting home harder when there's a car bomb that goes off like right outside their building, and has this very incredible shot where like glass is exploding in just as they're like elected, having another election for the Pope, and it lets you realize that there are real world consequences, that it might not affect the internal workings of the cardinals, but it's gonna affect everything that happens outside, and it is gonna spill out there and boil over. Where it helps to have like this mysterious new cardinal, this new young cardinal who's come in, who has more real world experience, to kind of lead the religion like to a better place. And it's a twisty film. It's got some surprising twists here and there, including probably like the final few scenes. There's a big surprise, which I won't reveal here. But it really does like test Lawrence to realize, how much importance he has, even when he's older, and like, he has this weariness towards this election where he feels like, I don't think there's anything we can do, and realizing that, no, there actually is something you can do. And if you do have that power to, fight back against corruption, you need to use it. And you can't just sit on the sidelines, because if you don't, it's going to have like it's going to have a cascading effect for everything else. And what I love so much about the film is not just the way that it's shot and the dialogue, but how it just feels like topically appropriate. Because I know, like, because there's going to be a lot of people who were, this election season, they're getting very, frustrated and weary, and people who watch this film, I think, are going to see a lot of themselves in both Lawrence and Bellini. They're going to realize that, they're so frustrated, they don't want anything to do with this, but at the same time realizing, no, wait, there are stakes here, and we should, if we have power, we should probably use it. And it actually takes a rather surprising turn by the end, because it actually ends on a very hopeful note for how much corruption is unearthed in this film, which I don't quite want to say it's like it's a happy ending. I'm just saying it's an ending that has a little bit more hope that, you know, if you just find a little bit more faith to keep going on and using the power you have to make the world better, not just sit on the sidelines and be cynical. There is something more that you can do for this world. So I was surprised by that. I just, you know, this very intriguing thriller about religious and political corruption, and it ends on like a little bit of a high note. And I think that's like a great note to go out on for just a film that's just immaculate. Just the cast is fantastic here. It's brilliantly written here. Just the director, Edward Berger, who previously worked on All Quiet on the Western Front, which some people are conflicted about that film, but I love the way that it's shot. Like it was gritty and brutal. And here it's just, it feels like, you know, it's very decadent. It's very colorful, and it's got some astounding, you know, just the way that everything is blocked and framed is just gorgeous. And it's just, it's one of those thrillers that is so engrossing, that I didn't even realize this until I got out of the film. This movie's rated PG. It is such an intoxicating thriller with just its fantastic dialogue and staging that I didn't even realize that it's rated PG, and it's a pretty damn good film. I love the performances of Fiennes and Tucci and Lithgow, even Rossellini, for how sparingly she's used in the film. I think she's used to a perfect degree, where, like, you know, because like the first few times she shows up, she says nothing, but you know that she's got some dirt on these Cardinals. You see her and just, you know that she's, like, you know, the wisest person in here among everybody. So yeah, fantastic performances, beautifully shot. It's a damn good thriller about voting for a new pope. So Conclave will be in theater. I believe it's having a wide release this Friday. So you can catch it in theaters on October 25th. Let me read some of the comments here from Beth Scott. Let's see. Love Ray Fiennes. Yep. Yeah, it's fine. Is it necessary to understand the details of Catholicism to enjoy the movie? I don't think so. I mean, it might help to realize, like, some of the ceremony, but they do have just, like, they have, like, establishing subtitles to let you know about, like, their sequestering, and what time they are on the election. And I mean, I guess, like, probably, like, the biggest thing to note, to actually come to think of it, I think this film actually kind of does a good job kind of, like, showing, like, the mechanics of how, like, you know, like a conclave would operate. Because I love how when they announce that they haven't chosen a new pope yet, because some people are familiar with this, like, you know, when they choose a new pope, they put out the smoke from the pipe, and they actually, you know, once, like, they realize that, you know, once they count the votes and when they read them off, you see the mechanism that they use for getting, like, the smoke a certain color, and you know, activating it as they're, you know, stating that, okay, we haven't chosen a new pope yet. Because, yeah, I don't think you have to know anything about Catholicism to truly appreciate this film. And I say that mostly because I don't know that much about Catholicism. I know a little bit here and there, but not, like, I know, like, the function of the cardinals and a lot of their routines and, you know, how they would function within this environment, but not much more than that. And this film, I think if you can, it's not even so much a religious film. It's more of a political film than anything. Because, like, it's more about, you know, the views that want to be represented by the church in choosing a pope here. So honestly, I don't think you have to know anything about Catholicism to appreciate the film. Honestly, I think it actually might be more enlightening, I think, to the operations of Catholicism, at least from this aspect of, like, choosing a pope. Let's see. Another comment from Beth Scott. My eldest son was recently baptized Catholic. After being raised with no religion, his now mother-in-law asked him to convert in order to marry her daughter. That's very common. That's pretty much the Catholic way. So that aspect I do know. My son seems to be interested in it. How would a Catholic respond to this movie? That depends on what type of Catholic. If it's a Catholic, and I think this is where I think it's more of an aspect that has to do with politics than actually the religion itself, because it seems that they do represent like the kind of like the more tactile nature of Catholicism here, because you see a lot of their routine. You see them, like their what the cardinals wear, what types of robes they wear for certain ceremonies, how they gather, how they sequester, how they prepare meals, how they section off the area where the Pope has died, how they handle the smoke, how they handle it's mostly just like the technical stuff. There is, I would say this, that there is a very big twist at the end of the film that I would say, if you're a Catholic who, I guess like the best way to phrase it is this, like if you're more of like a progressive Catholic and you take like more of like the practices and, recognize like, like the, that Catholicism has to be bound more by belief rather than, informing aspects of race and gender and sexuality, then I think you might like the film. And I say that only because like there's a fairly shocking twist towards the end here that's revealed about one of the cardinals, which I don't think is sacrilegious, depending on how you look at it. I think this is honestly kind of like more of like the progressive depiction of Catholicism, despite the fact that there's like a racist and a sexist cardinal vying for the position. Honestly, I think it does like a pretty good job kind of representing a kind of like almost like hope for Catholicism to do better, because I mean like the heroes of the film are like Lawrence and Bellini, and they clearly just want to make the world a better place, and they don't want Catholicism to be stuck in the mud or have backwards policies that are going to hurt the world. So and they're straight up like Catholic cardinals, like they don't like their faith is tested, but they don't want to abandon it completely. Like they still want to have faith in God. They're just not sure like how much faith they can represent within like the current leadership that they have there. So it's a very conflicting film. I would say that it does show a very, like I said, a very tactile version of Catholicism that is more intriguing. Which honestly, I'd be very fascinated to hear what Catholics would have to say about the film if they have that much experience with the papacy. And on that reason alone, I would actually say like, yeah, I'd be interested to hear what your son, who was just recently converted to Catholicism, would think about that film, because like on a technical level, I think it does a decent job representing how the papacy would function, but politically, I think it's more evocative of, I think, progressive aspects that I'm a little hesitant that most Catholics would accept, and I say that like not having been that familiar with like a lot of like Catholicism politics that might circulate between other like Catholics. So it's tough to say, but I would say that I don't think it smears the religion. If anything, I think it has a little bit more hope for Catholicism to kind of like root out its corruption. So yeah, it's a fascinating film. Endlessly fascinating. And I would actually love to watch it again, just because it's gorgeous. All right. Well, it's mostly good films from here on out, so I hopefully won't have to throw my voice out too much here. I got 3 more films on the docket. Let's see how we can get through this. Oh, one more question here. Remember the Last Temptation of Christ upset people? Yeah, but like the Last Temptation of Christ is like there's some genuine criticisms about how like they depicted certain aspects of like of the betrayal. Of course, I do know like there's the more graphic element that people criticize it for, but I think it helps that like that Conclave, it's based on a fictional novel, so if that helps, I guess. All right, So next one we got is the romantic drama comedy We Live in Time, which I have to get my notes up here. There we go. All right. Here we go with We Live in Time in 3, 2, 1. So We Live in Time is a dramatic romantic comedy starring Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh. And I think that I really appreciate how director John Crowley frames this type of relationship by making it non-linear. Because like the way that I've kind of like described this film is that it feels like putting on that perfect, that like your favorite album that like has like, you know, like those perfect like love songs, but having it set to shuffle. Because this is a nonlinear film. It darts between three key points in this relationship between Tobias, played by Andrew Garfield, and Almut, played by Florence Pugh. It shifts between the time where they first meet amid a car accident and propose to each other, and then it shifts back and forth between that and the pregnancy that Almut has with their daughter, and then it shifts into Almut's discovery of her cancer diagnosis and realizing that she has limited time to live and is concerned about wanting to make the most out of her life. And this structure works because I think like it sets like some expectations, because like when we first see them, the two of them, like we kind of like see them hanging out with each other. We see like Almut pregnant and on the toilet, and Tobias just hanging out with her, and then Almut getting her cancer diagnosis. So we're already set up for all these key events that we know are going to happen. We know there's going to be a pregnancy involved. We know that there's going to be a cancer diagnosis, and we know that these two are going to fall in love. And I think going back and forth between all that creates like this more complete picture of their lives that never bores. Because it feels like the moments that are chosen for this film are like the most fascinating, and like the scenes that you wouldn't typically see within like a romance. And I think the thing that I think I love most about the film is the characters. Obviously, if you have a romance film, you want to love the characters and you want to see them get together here. And they're pretty interesting, and like they have some. I think what's most fascinating about them are their careers. So Almut is this is a chef, a very accomplished chef who tries out like fusion techniques, and she's very accomplished. And Tobias, I love his career. He's a guy who works for Weetabix. And I love how, like, at one point, like, when he's getting into bed with Almut, like, you know, his talk, like, they end up having this conversation about, like, oh, do you get, like, free Weetabix at work? And Tobias is like, yeah, I have been known on a few times to get some free Weetabix, which is a super funny conversation to have while you're taking your pants off before you're getting ready to have sex. So there's a lot of, like, sweet and funny moments there. And I think they're balanced here, where it never feels like we're just getting the drama or the comedy out of certain bits. Because a film like this feels like it could be that. Like, it could feel like, you know, like the meet cute that happens here would just be all the silly and the sweet and the cute moments, and then all the scenes of her cancer diagnosis would be all the depressing and the saddest moments. And that's not to say there aren't sad moments there, but it feels like there's a good balance of all of that. And I think it helps that there's like a little bit, just enough of an absurdity to make this film more endearing. Because like I said, like Tobias does a fascinating job of, you know, working for Weetabix. And I love the meet cute between them, which is basically a car accident. It's Almut smacking into Tobias with her car and him ending up in the hospital and her trying to make amends, and that's how their relationship starts, which is weird, but also like cute and sweet at the same time in its own weird way. And I think the film establishes its fluctuation between the drama and the comedy is going to be more organic, based on the fact that when Almut first receives her cancer diagnosis, the first thing that she does with Tobias is pose this question of, okay, should I just lie down and die and just like take the treatments, or are we just going to ride this out and just, you know, make sure that the last few months of my life are going to be the best? You know, what are we going to do here? And it feels like this is a film that wants to kind of like, it still wants to be sweet and it still wants to have fun, but also not shy away from the more poignant moments of this type of relationship. And I think that shows like this more like complete picture of their relationship. And also like having it non-linear, I think prevents it from being boring. Because like, just when you think like we're getting like this sweet moment where, you know, Tobias is playing with his daughter, we get like this concerning dialogue between them about, you know, if they're going to have children or not. And of course, because we saw the pregnancy scene early, we know that they're going to have kids. But still, you're fascinated to see, like, how did that build to that? How did we get to this point? And how did the pregnancy happen? It's the delivery sequence in particular is a pretty sweet and funny moment, but also feels surprisingly grounded. Like, it feels like a moment that could go over the top with being too silly, but it feels like it's just funny enough where you could accept, where you could kind of like buy this as happening with the relationship between these two people. So Garfield and Pugh's performance, they have such good chemistry here, and you can tell that they have good chemistry just by the scenes where they don't have as much dialogue. Like there's a few moments where they're just hanging out and there's no specific dialogue that has to be had between them. They just have to have that resonant energy like between them, like where they could just be staring at each other and you can tell that they're in love. And probably my favorite scene in this film is the moment where like Almut is struggling through a pregnancy. She's not feeling that great and she just wants to hang out in the bathtub. So with barely any dialogue, you know, Almut gets undressed, she gets in the bathtub, and Tobias follows her into the tub with like, I forget what the sweet was. It's basically like cookies. He follows her in there with cookies, and they just sit there in the tub, staring at each other, eating cookies, her balancing some sweets on like her pregnant belly. And that's it. That's the whole scene. And it perfectly encapsulates just how devoted Tobias is and how much Almut appreciates that he'll stand by her. And I love how like that comes around later in the film where Almut wants to prove herself with this big cooking competition while she is, you know, has this cancer diagnosis and is sick. And it's one of those moments where Tobias is at first like frustrated because Almut wouldn't admit to Tobias that this is what she was secretly doing when he wasn't looking. But then he comes around and realizes, okay, I got to be there and support her and, you know, wanting to like prove herself, even though she doesn't have to, because like he'll always be there for her. But, you know, this is something she feels that she has to do before her clock runs out. And just him being there is so sweet. And like I said, this only focuses, I think, on the most interesting scenes. So like there isn't a lot of time focused on the specifics of like how they would eventually get married, or Almut's eventual death, or, you know, or all like the little things of like raising a child. It just feels like the key moments that you want to focus on for this couple that best displays how much they love each other. So like I said, it's like having all those favorite love songs set to shuffle, and just Garfield and Florence Pugh really make this film work, just because they have genuine love and emotion for each other, and just for focusing on all like the scenes that you wouldn't typically think would make for a good romantic drama. Like I was particularly interested with how many just like genuine displays of affection there were in a lot of the sex scenes. Because you'd think that, you know, like a lot of this, you would think that a lot of the sex scenes would be during like the early part of the film where they first meet and like they're debating whether or not they want to stay together. But actually it does proceed into like the cancer arc as well. And I think just like the way they show affection for each other, and they focus on like the key moments, not just on like the moments where like, you know, they're undressing and making out with each other, although they do spend just enough time on those scenes where I think like you could tell like they're really into each other. But then just like the afterglow of them just like getting dressed, or just them having that moment, like even when they're not fully together, where they don't live with each other, there's that moment where just like he leaves and like feeling that glow between them when like, you know, there's a wall apart from them, but they're still attracted to each other in that moment. And it's just it works so well for all those little moments while still having big moments and having lots of moments of fun. And I love how like it feels very humanizing to have more humor and scenes that could be a lot more tearful, and that could feel like they could spill off into melodramatics. In particular, there's one tragic scene here where Almut and Tobias go to the doctor, and they realize that, you know, the treatment isn't really working. And then to break the tension, Almut's stomach just kind of like growls. You realize, like, oh, I'm hungry. It's like, that's okay. And like the doctor hands out some candy, and they just have like a cute little discussion about candy, just to break the tension, just to like feel that, you know, like you're human for a moment, that, you know, like the clock isn't ticking down, that you're alive, and that you're in the moment, and that you can just be there and just have a normal conversation about sweets. And just so many of those moments, I think, are what make this movie work, and what made me love it so much more as a romantic dramatic comedy that can find that perfect balance of, you know, forming a more complete picture of a romance, rather than just being, is she gonna die? You know, are they gonna get together? Is she gonna have the baby? It's all those core aspects, but only focusing on the points that for life in general matter the most. And that's what I love so much about like We Live in Time. Like, it's not just a romantic dramatic comedy. It's one of those films where you can feel how much love there is with these characters, and it isn't reduced to such a simplistic degree. It feels very all-encompassing, and Garfield and Pugh's performance are what make this film work so damn well. So We Live in Time, I think, just I think it did premiere last weekend, I think, and I think it might be expanding a little bit more, but it is in theaters right now. So if you're in the mood for some romance this October, want a break from all the Terrifiers and the Joker movies and the papacy dramas, go check out We Live in Time. All right, 2 more. I think my voice can hold out. By the way, if you are enjoying most of these like early reviews that we're doing here, be sure to subscribe to this channel, because we've got a lot more coming. We're just at the start of award season. I'm just starting to get screeners. We got a lot of films we're going to be covering on this channel. Some films which might not even be out for weeks or months. I know for a fact that has happened, because at one point I think I reviewed Robot Dreams, which I got a screener for in December, and I found out it didn't come out to the general public until July of this year. So yeah, we got early reviews. I should probably read through some of the comments here before we get to the next film. Let's see. Beth Scott, you're making me want to go back to the movie theaters again. I've missed that. I love movies that make you think about the frailty of life. Oh, thank you for subscribing, Beth. I wonder, do I have the... I probably don't have the alerts icon. Do I have that? Okay, I do, but... Okay. Sorry, I use Streamlabs, and it's a piece of crap here, so... Okay, it is working. Okay. Yeah, thank you for subscribing, Beth. Yeah, we got lots of... That's all I do here. Just look at new movies, and there's going to be a lot. It's award season. But yeah, lots of good stuff to see in the theater. There it is. Speak of the devil. Or speak of... I didn't even... I didn't even plan to have, like, John Lithgow there. I think I just threw in, like, a random clip from... Buckaroo Banzai there. So yeah, if you love John Lithgow in Conclave, go watch Buckaroo Banzai, where he plays a villain who electrocutes himself to get to the 8th dimension. It's an adorable film. Okay, let's get to another film. And now we're... I think now I've covered all the films that are going to be in theaters, so pretty much the last 2 films here are films that are streaming right now. So if you can't leave the house, here's the films to watch. All right, so let's review Woman of the Hour, which is on Netflix right now. So here we go with Woman of the Hour in 3, 2, 1. So Woman of the Hour, directed by Anna Kendrick, is all about the 1970s serial killer known as Rodney Alcala. Now, what I love so much about this type of, because thing is like a serial killer type film, it's like, a true crime thriller. This feels like a film that it could just, it could just get lost in the investigation. It could just focus specifically on the kills and try to find like the motivation, and the audience is expected to play detective throughout. But we've gotten so many of these like true crime stories here that, like I was a little bit weary coming into this film. But I think what's fascinating about this film is that the way that Kendrick directs it is that she has a good eye to make this type of film focus more on the societal aspects that would fuel this type of killer, rather than finding like the simplistic motivation for why he did it, and why this dude throughout the 1970s proceeded to kill multiple women. Some that like there's only like a handful that were confirmed. It's believed that he killed many more throughout the decade. And he was known as, I believe he's known as like the dating game killer, because he went on the dating game with one of his victims that he tried to assault. So Rodney is played by Daniel Zavato, and the film opens with one of his kills. So we know that he's a photographer who lures women in. He gets them cornered, gets them alone, and waits for his moment to strike when he knows like he can get away with it. So we know he's bad news, but the person who doesn't know that he's a serial killer is Cheryl Bradshaw, who's played by Anna Kendrick, who is a struggling actress in late 70s LA. She can't find any work. She's just struggling to find a job and just doesn't have anything on her plate. And her last chance to get her name out there is to appear on the dating game as a woman who's going to interview three bachelors to decide who she's going to date. And among all three of them, Rodney's seems like the better one. Like, he gives like the correct answers. He gives the answers that don't feel like they're stumbling to be progressive or just, trying to be like sexual and trying too hard to come on to her. Like the first bachelor is just an uncertain guy who doesn't know how to talk to women. Bachelor number 2 is just kind of like a scummy guy who tries to, say all the sleazy stuff that he thinks women likes to hear. And Rodney is just like that perfect manipulator of realizing, this is how you impress women. This is how you lure them in. I'm going to lay this trap. And even though Cheryl doesn't know this, she's not entirely clueless. Like, she knows how predatory men can be. She's given all the warning signs from a few other women. Like, in particular, she connects the most with like the makeup women on the dating game show who talk to her very frank and openly and tell her that, look, it's not so much about, who's the best guy to date. It's about who's the least dangerous. And by that logic, just based on, the way that she talks with Rodney, it seems like he's the least dangerous. And the film is like, the way that this movie is filmed, like, it darts between Rodney's various kills, like before and after this dating game, and the dating game itself, where Cheryl is slowly asking these questions and doesn't realize that Rodney's a serial killer. And it perfectly parallels the way that women get lured in here. So in a sense, you're watching Rodney set this trap, but it's a trap that's also like, it's fueled by that society as well. Because like the dating game, it's hosted here by Ed Burke, who, like, more or less is like Jim Lang from the dating game. He's played by Tony Hale, who, when the camera's around, he's like, yeah, it's a wonderful dating game here. You're going to pick out among these men. And when the cameras are off, he's just like, God, like, don't step over my lines. Don't play this up for fun. And just, he really hates that Cheryl goes off script and starts asking more frank questions that women would like to ask on the dating game. So there's this intriguing aspect, I think, where Cheryl feels like she's taking ownership, where like she is being more vocal about like her agency and like posing these tougher questions to the bachelors, which is fascinating. But at the same time, like she's still getting caught up in this trap, where it feels like no one can help her. This is especially true for the character of Laura, played by Nicolette Robinson, who is someone who realizes that Rodney is a serial killer. And she's in the audience at the dating game, and she tries to find a way to get someone to help, like get someone who's working on the show to track him down. They won't help. She tries to go to the police. They won't help. And it's just bitterly frustrated that there are so many of these societal aspects that are allowing the serial killer to still function and still be out there. And that eventually, by the time he gets caught, it's just like it's a breath of relief. In fact, I love the way that film ends on that note. It ends with the last potential victim of Rodney just escaping, calling the cops, and then watching from a distance as the cops come, force him to the ground, and get the handcuffs on him and throw him into custody. And she just takes that moment to kind of like breathe in, and just, they cut before you can let that breath out. And I love the way that it cuts too, because like it cuts like right at that moment where just like it's like, are they getting? Yes, they are. And then it cuts, and then you hear yourself just breathing out that relief, like, oh, finally, this guy got caught. Like, he's not gonna keep doing this anymore. But just like the way that the way that the movie is shot, like I love that it's focusing on all just like the tense moments of dialogue, because even after the dating game, like Rodney and Cheryl, they do talk for a bit, and you can sense there's that tension where you're just waiting. You're waiting for that moment where he's gonna talk her further and further into this trap, and then eventually close in on her. And there's just this remarkable tension where even when even when like they're in a populated area and he's not going to kill her in that moment, you can sense that it's coming. That that you're just like you're like in that mode of a horror movie. You're like, get out of the house, get out of that relationship. This isn't going to work. You're going to die. And it's like, but it's one of those things where it's like you can understand from her perspective. He seemed like the better man in that situation, and it turns out that it really isn't, because there's so much more lurking under the surface there. But the way that Kendrick chooses to focus on like those key aspects, I think, is a benefit of how she frames so much of this film, where it's more about the conversations than it is the kills. Because every time that there are a few scenes where we do see Rodney kill somebody, but they're always from a distance. You always see them, like the first kill, like is in the middle of the desert, but you see it from inside the car from a far distance away. Another kill is in an apartment, but you see it from the roof, looking downward from the glass, where you feel like you're a helpless bystander, just watching these horrifying things happen off to the side and not being in that moment. And I think what's fascinating about that angle is that in doing so, Kendrick kind of like forces the audience to question how much we pay attention to a serial killer when we're not in that moment. Because because we can look from like a distance and judge, but once the kill happens, like, we don't see it in vicious detail. We're looking at it from afar. And that's a questioning more of like, how much do we think about the kills when we're not directly there, when we're not involved. Even when Rodney gets arrested, there are a few close-ups, but from the perspective of the victim, she's far enough away where she doesn't have to be right there. So there's a distance placed between the kills and what leads up to each, basically, what leads up to every demise, and a notch in the belt for like the serial killer. That it's fascinating to kind of like question the distance and what leads up to that moment. What are the most fascinating aspects of like the 1970s patriarchy that would boil over into that moment of murder, and it doesn't give an easy response. Like it basically mostly asserts that there are all these contributing factors, and they just kind of bubbled and boiled to a point where it doesn't so much matter what Rodney's motivation was for killing these women. It's that he could. It's like he was able to set the trap. He was able to get away with it, and there were so many societal factors that allowed him to do this and feel like he could do it. To such a degree that I think it makes for a more interesting dissection of this type of serial killer, rather than like a simplistic investigation of like, where was the motive here? And how many women did he kill? Like the specifics are not that intriguing so much as the the drive for these types of characters. So yeah, just on that like boiling tension and the focus on like, you know, edge of your seat dialogue. I think Kendrick's film is an astounding work on a true story serial killer. Which I really want. Like, it's so easy to just, you know, focus on like the kills themselves and the details and get lost in the investigation, and the audience plays the detective. You're not playing the detective here. If anything, you're playing that person who witnesses a murder on the street, and it just sits with you, and you're trying to contemplate, why would this happen, and how did everything else in society lead up to these killings, and how did this keep going? So yeah, it's a fascinating aspect to explore, and it's such a haunting thriller that I'm gonna be thinking about for many days after seeing it. So yeah, that Kendrick knows how to direct a pretty damn good thriller. So Woman of the Hour is currently playing on Netflix. It is a very creepy film. Next year, the audience gave the audience a bit of backstory of one of the potential victims. That's rarely the case. Yeah, there's way more agency, I think, focused on the victims than anything else, which I think is a very important aspect, because like this is the problem you have, like even with when Netflix does all their serial killer dramas, they tend to get lost on the killers themselves, and they become more fascinating than the victims, and people start getting weirder ideas about them. So yeah, I think Kendrick has the right idea here. She knows the good route to take here. Sounds like it might feel like we're the victim also. Oh yeah, very much so. You feel like you're right there with them, and that you just, and I think it works by you have all these close-ups where you're in the room, and then when the kills happen, you feel like you just leave the room. Because if that happened, of course, like immediately the first thing you'd want to do is go. You want to get away from that situation. But then it solves the questioning, well, what happens to the person you leave behind? You know, that's it's such a fascinating angle to consider. And yeah, I haven't stopped thinking about it. Like I don't want to spoil too much, but there's a scene where like Rodney is following Cheryl to her car, and just the distance between them, but like how close the trap is closing in between them. It's the tension is so damn good in that moment. So good. All right, and lastly, let's end this with a bit of horror. Let's end with one of my favorite horror anthology films, the VHS series, which I believe this is the 7th VHS film, if I'm correct. All right. Well, here we go in 3, 2, 1. So VHS Beyond is another entry in the found footage horror anthology of VHS. And the VHS series of films have kind of grown on me. I wasn't that big a fan of the first film, but VHS 2 really wrapped me in, and VHS 3 tried to go the online route, and it didn't really work for me all that much. But the subsequent sequels that followed after that have been pretty damn good. I've actually really loved the past VHS films, like VHS 85 and VHS 99. In fact, I think 99 is a tie for like VHS 2 with like my favorite of that series. Now, VHS Beyond actually had me a little bit more intrigued, because this anthology is not based. It's not like the previous films where it's based on a specific year, but this is based on a specific type of horror. So in this case, it's sci-fi. And just sci-fi in general. I don't mean specifically on aliens or specifically on cosmic horror, but it does have all of that. And even some mad scientist creature feature stuff in there as well. So I'm not going to lie here. This is a bit more of like a mixed bag. I did not like Beyond as much as I liked 85 or 99. And it's mostly just because the batting average isn't that great here. And that's not to say that there aren't some damn good entries in this anthology. It's just that not all of them are that great. Not as great with like the consistency of the past VHS films. In particularly, I was kind of underwhelmed by the framing device here, called like abduction, which is staged as kind of like one of those like paranormal investigation films that you'd see on television, and it's got a little bit of like a dark twist at the end there, but it's staged in a manner that I think is almost like too believable that you would see this on like the History Channel, akin to like Ancient Aliens. That it didn't engross me as much as the other framing devices for VHS. So it didn't work for me. I really didn't like the framing device that much. It has a decent money shot at the end there where you see a camera go down someone's throat. But the investigation itself is not that fascinating. It mostly just feels like a standard haunted house type deal. That said, the first short that starts the film after the framing device, I thought was technically pretty damn good. It's called Stork. It's directed by Jordan Downey, and it's about a law enforcement team that has to go into this house that is overrun with what look like are zombies. And we see the film entirely from like their from like the cameras mounted on their uniforms, like with like the badge cams or something like that. And so you see them where they're running through the house and they're gunning down zombies. And like some of them have like chainsaws and stuff like that, and they come back to life. And then as they progress further and further through the house, they discover like weird corners and dark, like weird babies. And then eventually they discover like this kind of alien bird that has been manipulating all like the people in this house. And it's just, it's a weird effect, but I love the technicalities of it. On a technical level, just the violence and the weird creature effects and the gore and the blood and the like the POV shots where like they're running and gunning and just going all about the house. It's just beautifully staged. Just on a technical level, I love Stork. The next entry, Dream Girl, is called Dream Girl. It's directed and co-written by Virat Paul, Beniva. I believe I'm pronouncing that name correctly. And it's mostly it's a behind the scenes like type of a paparazzi trying to invade a Bollywood set and get an exclusive interview with this popular Bollywood star, who, when they enter her dressing room, they soon learn that she is in fact an android who wears skin to look like a human being. And she is just grown upset with with the way that she's being treated as a star, and decides to rebel against everyone and tear off her skin, and then tear off other people's skin to wear as her own. And I love her. I just love her rampage across the set where she's killing everybody, ripping them to shreds, because it darts between like the paparazzi who are trying to film her with their camcorder, and then just like the professional, like, high quality cameras that they're shooting with on set. So just like the usage of the found footage there, I thought was great. I thought the ultimate resolve I'm a little bit mixed on, but in terms of just like staging the violence with an android, I thought it was all right. It's a pretty good short. The short after that, unfortunately, is the one I like the least. It's called Live and Let Dive, which is directed by Justin Martinez, and it's about a group of skydivers who their plane crashes into a UFO, and they descend to Earth while these aliens follow them down. Now, the crash of the plane into the UFO itself is pretty cool, and I love how like some of them like die mid-flight, and like they're struggling to not fall to their death while they look up at this UFO and the aliens that are coming. It's not bad on that aspect, but once they get to the ground, it pretty much just turns into like to like a very familiar version of like aliens that want to come down and kill us. Like, even like it's mostly just characters running around yelling each other's names, fleeing from aliens that want to try to kill them, and the aliens they're just not that appealing to look at. I mean, even with like their primary means of attacking being these like these weird rays that kind of like incinerate people that come out of like their faces that look like they have like vaginas that open up and shoot out rays. It wasn't doing enough for me. Like it just felt like it felt very much like this other Alien short from VHS 2, I believe, where a bunch of people are invaded by aliens and like they attack and they abduct. It's pretty much the same deal. Like if you've seen any like extraterrestrial horror film, this just feels like an average type of movie to that degree. It really reminded me of like films like Extraterrestrial from about like 10 years back, which is a fairly forgettable sci-fi horror film. I'm not even sure how I remember that one. I guess like I was searching my memory for other terrible sci-fi horror films and that came up. The other film I'm kind of mixed on in this batch is Fur Babies. And I kind of like the idea of it because this is the creature feature one about a doggy daycare lady who is suspected by an animal activist group doing something sinister with dead animals, specifically dead doggies. And they're right, but what they learn is that this woman is basically trying to kidnap people and basically turn people into dogs. She wants to turn people into her old dogs, like these grotesque human-sized dogs, and it's kind of a fascinating idea, and it's got some decent tension here and there, but a lot of the dialogue just didn't really work for me there. I do, however, like the fact that this was co-directed by Justin Long, who you might remember, he was in a horror film, a creature feature horror film called Tusk, and I couldn't help but I feel like a lot of people are thinking this too. It's like, it feels like Justin Long kind of like took a lot of the stuff from Tusk and kind of applied it to Fur Babies, which the creature feature aspect, I mean, in terms of the effects and their grotesqueness of the film, I actually kind of like. I like the film on a technical level with Justin Long here. The dialogue and the characters really didn't win me over, but once it embraces a little bit more of like the weird human dog stuff, it was kind of fun, but mostly at like the tail end. So bit of a mixed bag there. And finally, we come to my favorite short. I wish that this short just ended the film rather than having the framing device, but the last full short here is Stowaway. And this is the most notable one because it's directed by Kate Siegel, but it's written by Mike Flanagan. Mike Flanagan, big name in horror. And he has a fantastic script here because I love the idea, because the whole idea for this short is that it's a woman investigating UFO and she gets aboard a UFO. And to her amazement, this UFO is going to take off with her inside. Now, the bad news is that there are no seatbelts or anything that she can restrain herself on once this ship takes off at like full speed. Because once it does, it starts like shooting her around the ship like a pinball, and giving her these horrible injuries. Now, the good news for her is that there are nanomachines aboard that can repair her. So if she gets like horribly injured, the nanomachines will come to her aid and they'll repair some of her flesh. The worst news is that the nanomachines don't really understand human anatomy all that well. So every time that the ship makes another jump into space and knocks her about a lot, she sustains more injuries, and the nanomachines build her back weirder and weirder to the point where she's nothing like herself, and she can't stop it because the ship just keeps going and going, and the nanomachines keep healing her and keep making her stranger and stranger. And it's such a fascinating aspect of horror, using this sci-fi angle where the alien technology is not terrifying for the fact that it could kill you, but for the fact that it will never let you die in this scenario. And I love the way that it's amateurly shot too. Like it really is shot by someone who does have like that look and feel of someone who's an amateur documentarian who is taking it upon themselves with like just going out in the desert with their own equipment and thinking they're going to find something and getting nothing. And then ultimately being fascinated when they do end up on a UFO. So just beautiful staging there and a fascinating idea there. So, like I said, fairly mixed bag here. I would say like the best shorts here are Stork and Stowaway. The mixed bag ones are Fur Babies and Dream Girl. And the ones I really didn't like was The Framing Device of Abduction and Live and Let Dive. So, little bit, like a little more than half of the shorts here are pretty damn good. And so on that basis, I thought the film, it's okay. It's not as good as VHS 99 or VHS 2. Those have the most consistent quality, and they're so damn good. I kind of want to go back and watch those again. But for trying out sci-fi here, I think there's enough good ideas here where it definitely is worth watching. And it does make me excited to see where this VHS series can go next. I mean, romance, comedy, who knows? Like there's so much you can do with this anthology, and I love the fact that it keeps going, and that it still has some fresh ideas here, even for ones that I really thought were kind of lackluster here. So yeah, it's a decent addition to the VHS series of films, even if it's not its best. So VHS Beyond is currently playing on Shudder, which has a lot of great horror films that I'm still catching up on. I'm still catching up on everyone's telling me I gotta see Oddity. I have it on my watch list next. I just finished up what's that film? Daddy's Head was really good. And there's like there's a documentary series in there called Horror's Greatest, which I love having that on in the background, just hearing all these horror experts like Joe Hill and what's his name? Oh God, what's his name? The Polka Dot Man from Late Night with the Devil. Just talk up their love of their favorite horror films. So it's been fun having that on in the background while I work. So let's see. Thank you to T.M. Martin Esquire for subscribing there. Sorry I didn't break the flow there, but yes, thank you for subscribing. Let me read through some of the comments here since we're almost to the end here. Let's see. I would love to see a TV show of the cop alien hunters. I kind of would too. I think, well, actually, you know what? I would love to see an anthology film of the cops, just tackling different stuff. Just as one film, not as a full show, just as like a 2-hour film in which they have 4 half-hour segments. Or you know what they could do? They could stage it as kind of like a show within a show, where they frame it as just like a collection of 4 episodes and showing as a kind of like a mini series that they pitch to networks. I'd love that. Let's see what else we got here. Beth says, so glad I stopped by to watch for the first time. I'm going to take a deep dive into your work. Oh, thanks, Beth. I mostly do like video essays and movie reviews here. As well as like end of the year lists and these live streams, obviously. I've been debating about doing gaming streams, mostly because like I used to do a series called Games Based on Movies, and there are a few in my backlog that I kind of want to cover, but I'm just finding the time. Let's see, Human Canines. I didn't even realize I made that pun, and I probably should have. Thank you for pointing that out, TM. Okay, so. Oh, God, I am running out of I'm glad I got to that last bit there. Okay. So, really quick, let's recap what we reviewed on today's stream. We reviewed Joker Filet Adieu, a film where probably the most fascinating thing about the movie is that its sequel is the French translation of Shared Delusion. It's a much sloppier film with a lot of contradictory scenes and fails to kind of like hammer home the message that the Joker is not a good guy, and it doesn't really have much faith as a prison thriller or a courtroom drama or a fantasy musical. We reviewed The Apprentice, a film with some good performances by Sebastian Stan and Jeremy Strong, who play Donald Trump and Roy Cohn respectively. And it does cover a lot of the key events, but mostly in a kind of glazed over way and trying to humanize Trump a little bit too much, where I'm not quite sure who this film is going to be for. Because, for the people who are not familiar with this material, it might be eye-opening, but for those who are, this film goes soft on that material. We reviewed Conclave, a papacy political drama starring Ray Fiennes, Stanley Tucci, and John Lithgow. It has fantastic performances, great intrigue, incredible dialogue, and just beautifully, beautifully shot. A very excellent thriller, and a thriller that's rated PG, just because it relies on damn good dialogue to carry it throughout. Fascinating film. We reviewed We Live in Time, a romantic dramatic comedy starring Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh in a non-linear depiction of their relationship. They have real chemistry there, and I love that the film chooses to focus on the sweetest and most important moments of their life, and the moments that matter most in a relationship. And then I reviewed Woman of the Hour, directed by Anna Kendrick, about the real-life serial killer of the 1970s who is known as the dating game killer. And I love the fact that the film chooses not to focus on the kills so much as the society and the dialogue that would lead someone into setting this trap for women in the patriarchal 1970s. And finally reviewed VHS Beyond, which takes the horror anthology series and puts a sci-fi twist on it with a handful of segments that mostly work, and its batting average comes out a little bit lower than the previous entries like VHS 85 and VHS 99, but it's still a worthy sequel, and it has some good bits throughout, including the short by Mike Flanagan is definitely worth watching. So, of all the films we reviewed today, if you're going to the theater, I would say this weekend, go see Conclave, damn good film. But if you can't wait that long, We Live in Time is playing there right now. And if you're at home, go check out Woman of the Hour is playing on Netflix, and VHS Beyond is playing on Shudder. Now, if you would like to read some of my reviews, if you prefer to, read them rather than listen to it at work or you're busy or you're with people or whatever, you can go to my website, movieswithmark.com, to see written reviews of all of the films I've covered here. Actually, with the exception of Woman of the Hour. That one I haven't quite finished yet, but it should be up by tomorrow. You can also check out my written reviews over on Film Inquiry, as well as TwinCitiesGeek.com, where I do some reviews over there, but I also do interviews where you can read up on. I basically made it a trend, like every year I interview different cartoon voice actors. I think it's just something I gravitated to because a few years ago I interviewed Rob Paulson, and then after that I interviewed Phil Lamar, and then last year I interviewed Paul Rugg, who does the voice of Freakazoid. So this year, I don't want to jinx it, but I do have another cartoon voice actor I am trying to interview. So here's hoping. Here's hoping that I can score that interview. So looking forward to that. The other thing too is I don't know if I posted it in the description or not, but I also have a Patreon as well where I do post some essays that I don't post on YouTube. Some that I do record, but then when I go back and think about it, or I look at the data and my research that doesn't quite match up, I don't tend to post that, or I don't feel good about posting them, so I post them there. Also worth noting is that on my Patreon, I am writing books on movie history, and right now I am writing a book on the history of Saturday morning cartoons. And I'm actually updating that as we go. So I believe the latest entry I put up there was for Reboot. But I also I try to finalize stuff too. So currently I'm up to the SpongeBob era, so early 2000s there. So I'm getting close to finishing the book. So, and people who support me on Patreon, they will actually get a copy of the book. If you're on the lower tier, you will get a digital copy, which I'll send to you through Amazon Kindle. Or if you're on the more expensive tier, of $15 a month, you will get a physical copy of the book. I'm debating whether or not to do a hardcover that I want to put out, because hardcover is a little bit more expensive. I think I might, if I like the cover, I might send out hardcovers, because there have been some people who have been supporting me on Patreon through there where I feel like I might owe them a little something for all that. So I might be shipping out a hardcover to them. But But yeah, it'll be a better deal because like there's well over like 500 pages I've written for this book, so it's gonna be at least like $20 to cover everything. And hey, the Patreon is for that is only $15, so you'd be saving quite a bit of money by going there. I guess like here's the thing, I might be finishing it soon. I'm not gonna say for sure that it's gonna be done by next month. It might be because I'm getting close. But I'll let you know when it's coming up if you really want to get a good deal. So let me know, and I'll inform you. Okay, so enough of that. So what do we got coming up? We got more movie reviews in the weeks ahead. In November, we will be in the heat, the like not quite the dead center, but very close to award season. So there's a few films that I'm going to be covering. I didn't have time to cover today, but I have seen the sports drama Unstoppable. So we will be covering that, and other films that I will be covering in the next few weeks will be Nickel Boys and Heretic, starring who's that actor? Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant will be in that horror film Heretic will be coming up. So those I will for sure be seeing, and if you're curious further down the pike, it's not for sure, but I do have some confirmation that I will be seeing Wicked and Moana 2. And I do want to try to cover those on stream before they debut. So I might be doing like a little pre-Thanksgiving stream to cover all that, where I will be covering like Wicked and Moana 2. So look forward to that in the future. So be sure to like this video just so other people can see the reviews, and subscribe to stay up to date on the latest movie reviews. So I will catch you all next time. I'll be back with you sometime in November. Oh, wait, before I go, quick up. I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but I was going to mention this weeks ago, but coming up in November, on November 13th, I believe, it's directly in the middle of November, I am going to be hosting Secret Movie Night at the Imaging Theaters in Plymouth, Minnesota there. So if you've never been to these, they're a lot of fun. They're basically people purchase tickets to a film that they don't know they're going to see. The only person who knows is me. I'm going to be hosting the event, so I'm going to be out there giving a little bit of an introduction. And then after the film is done, I'm going to be talking about why I chose this film and some interesting facts about the movie, and be taking questions from the audience. So it's a lot of fun. Nobody knows what the film is. Only I know. I'm not even. I debated giving hints, but I think like people might know me too well that they'd pick up on the hints and get it immediately. So I'm not going to reveal anything about it here, other than it's going to be a big surprise, and it's one film that I am looking forward to showing on the big screen there. This is actually going to be my second time doing it. I had done this before, and the last film I chose was The Apartment, which I love. It's one of my favorite films of all time, so it's not going to be The Apartment, if that's any hint. So, yeah, that's going to be coming up, and I don't have much news on Anime Detour other than the fact that I did get the hotel room, and I have confirmed my registration with that, so I'll talk more about that. But yeah, more films coming up in the future. So until November, I will see you all next time. So have a nice Halloween, everybody. I'll see you all in November, and yeah, go watch some good stuff. Have a good one.